see many familiar faces in our new venue here. So we will be hearing first some opening words from GDV CEO Jörg Asmussen, and then we will have some MEPs, some experience, some new MEPs to talk about insurance in the new term, the fresh mandate, fresh ideas, what do we want to see happening. So we'll talk all about that. As always, we have a microphone, so if you want to ask questions, please do so. Simply raise your hand and I will give you the floor. With that, I think I can hand over straight away to, as I said, GDV CEO, but also former State Secretary in the Federal Ministry of Finance and ECB Director. Take it away, Jörg.
Yes, thanks a lot. Yes, honorable member of Parliament, dear Aura, dear Rasmus, dear friends of GDV, or let's say the insurance bubble here in Brussels. I see many familiar faces from GDV sister organizations in Europe, so glad to see you all here. The room is full. I think you're interested in especially what the two members of Parliament will tell you what their plans are for the next 5 years. I'm also curious. I must confess I have not met both of them in person before, but I'm very much convinced, looking at their CV, that they are very knowledgeable and nice people. Yeah, because it's rather basic as always, because Aura has worked for 3 years for my old friend Jirki Katainen, so that must mean something, because I know Jirki has very high quality standards when he chooses his team. So, and for Rasmus it's even more basic. We grew up in the same small town at the Baltic Sea. The difference, he did this 3 decades after me, but it's still the same town. We gather today when the new parliament is ready to embark on his new mandate. Confirmation hearings are in front of the parliament. I think we have all seen strong impulses from Mario Draghi and Enrico Letta. So I'm delighted to listen to the two members of the European Parliament, what their vision is at this decisive moment for Europe. And for us, insurers, if you think what is the policy agenda, it's undisputed the Capital Markets Union, or as it's now labeled, Savings and Investment Union. We had the pleasure of welcoming Enrico Letta at our summer reception here in Brussels last June. And he explained to us that this is not just a rebranding, but it's a different narrative. And I think Enrico is right. Capital markets probably sounds a bit remote, a theoretical concept that good for banks and insurance companies, but what about the citizens of Europe? And I think this is a good rebranding. Let's have a new narrative. And let's see how we can promote investments. And you know, this is where insurance come in. We are the largest institutional investors in Europe. We provide critical funding for the real economy. More than 70% of our investments are within the Eurozone. And here the largest chunk is via different asset classes in the real economy, so it's not just financing government bonds, but also government bonds needs to be financed. So this is the big, probably, task in front of us, the savings and investment unions, and I'm very happy to discuss with the two of you what you think could be the way forward. The second aspect that comes to my mind, to our mind, for the beginning of the new mandate of the European Parliament and the European Commission is, of course, the question of competitiveness. And this is directly linked how rules are made here in Brussels. And again, I'm very interested what your perspective is here. I want to be clear, I'm not talking about deregulation. Yeah, the global financial crisis is nearly 15 years ago. Clearly at that point in time, especially banks were too little regulated, had too less capital. We had no global liquidity rules. We have passed. This is 15 years ago. And the question is, how can we move forward in order to stay competitive. And just refer to a few numbers which are taken out of the Draghi report. He says the EU in the last 5 years has adopted 13,000 laws, while at the same time the US has done only 5,000. China, nobody knows, but the rule of law is also a bit questioned there. So the question is, what is the right forward? I mean, all these legal initiatives are meant to pursue important objectives related to the green transition, consumer protection, financial stability, and we share all these objectives. But the sheer volume of text, and especially the ever-expanding number of reporting and disclosure obligations, could be counterproductive. And this is why we have to think how we can move forward. And I repeat what many others already have said. Yeah? Instead of making the regulatory framework ever more detailed and complex, we need consolidation and focus on implementation. And I'm happy that President von der Leyen seems to share this view. There's a new commissioner for implementation and simplification and cutting administration burdens. But that's not enough. I mean, member states, as well as the European Parliament, have to hold the Commission to these promises. And the question is, what do they do in their own legislative activity? When there is a new parliament with 700 nearly members of parliament, there are 27 commissioners. Will they focus on implementation and making things work? Or maybe we can repair something which is sometimes not working. What we definitely need is better coordination between horizontal and sector-specific rules, as well as between national, European, and international levels. So if we have agreed on a global standard, Europe does not need to add different, more burdensome rules. And where we have a European framework, existing national rules can be removed. One example from our sector is we will have to implement and use DORA from January next year. We have domestic legislation which is called FIGHT. This then should be replaced. I know that the two of you have a sharp cut, so I will stop here. I will leave the question around protection gaps. So what do we do as insurers to provide risk cover for old age, natural disasters, or cyber risk? I will just leave this to the debate. Again, I thank you that you all have come. Invite you for the discussion. The next 5 years will be critical for the future of Europe and its citizens. The insurance sector stands ready to contribute to solutions. And so it's not just an opportunity to discuss here today, it's also a call for collaboration. And now I'll leave it to the moderator. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much indeed, Jörg. And you've already introduced our two speakers, so I'll invite our two MEPs, Aura Sala and Rasmus Andersen, to join us here on the stage, because we have a lot to get through in just 1 hour. Aura, let me start with you. Newly arrived in Brussels. It's an unusual time for those of us who've been hanging around Brussels for many, many years. We're in this kind of lull between the new Commission and the new Parliament already taking up its position. What are you looking forward to over the next 5 years? What do you think are going to be the key topics, the key challenges? And maybe tell us how optimistic you are about whether the Parliament and the EU as a whole can meet those challenges.
Thank you so much, and thank you for having me here today. I need to disappoint you. I'm definitely not new to this Brussels bubble. I have lived here for 9 years. I used to be in the Commission for 6 years during the Juncker mandate. with Vice President Katainen. We took over when it was still Barroso II, and the financial crisis was still glooming over us, especially what happened in Greece. After that, I served the whole Juncker Commission there, President Juncker and Vice President Katainen. Interesting times. We have come a long way. However, it is still glooming, as you know. We haven't really managed to get competitiveness as in our agenda, in the central of our agenda. And now with Draghi report, now with the new Commission, there is hope, but there is also something that I'm super worried about. I come from Finland, and I know that we are these called as austerity hawks in that country, but I'm thankful that I have full room of Germans here, so you understand us. So I'm worried that Draghi is proposing a new joint debt to cover our problems. That's not the way forward, I'm sorry. It's absolutely not. First of all, we don't have public money, and we should not take more joint debt. That's not sustainable. Where we need to focus is reducing red tape, and not only in our beautiful speeches, like I'm giving you today here, but actually the devil is in the details. You are working on Insolvency II, you are working on maybe some of you banking regulation and so on and so forth. Many excellent things we put in place after the financial crisis, very much needed. However, when we are going to the implementation phase and enforcing some of these legislations, it's not always looking this from the customer's perspective, from our P2P market perspective. It's not always so well implemented or enforced that we wished once we had the proposal. So I would say the devil is in the details, and we absolutely need to cut red tape. That's something that where this new Commission needs to focus, and not making new proposals yet again. We will go in more into details, but I will just challenge this from the very beginning that I disagree with Draghi on this one. And when we get there that we actually reform our market, we don't need to throw so many subsidies into this. We need to make Europe attractive in the eyes of private investors, and now it is not that.
Rasmus, same question to you. What do you foresee for the next 5 years? Set out your stall. Tell us your, hopes, aspirations, and where you see the challenges and the devil that are mentioned in the detail.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, let me thank you to you for organizing this panel, because I think that this is really important, and also on an important with an important timing, because we are preparing the hearings for the new commissioners, which will take place in some weeks' time. We all have our meetings, and especially looking on the field of investment, but also for the insurance industry. I think there are also with the way like Commission President von der Leyen is like addressing the new commission, or is building up the new commission, there is like more than one commissioner dealing with the topics we will have to deal with in the committee, in the Econ committee, or you as an industry. Of course, there are some that, who are main responsible, but the whole issue of creating an investment union is something the new commission will have as a priority. And I think, like in the general lines as Parliament, we can agree that this is important, and we need to boost investments to strengthen our competitiveness. I think the European economy is in a complicated situation, but we are still also quite strong, and we have some strengths we also can build up, and I also think this is important to remind ourselves about it. And then I think debating investments from my perspective, and there I maybe as a northern German, half Danish, closer to Draghi than to you, is that we both need to see on the level of private investments, but what I think also Draghi made very clear also in the plenary of the Parliament some weeks ago, is that private investments and public investments needs to be combined, and you will not boost private investments if you have a EU budget where you can't invest enough also from a public money, and this is also what basically, for example, the US is doing. And this, for me, means that we all need to stretch a bit more and not to stay on our general group line or party line when it comes to what Draghi addresses. Because if we're doing this, then we will continue like we did in the past, and this will not work. And from a green perspective, more like left progressive perspective, maybe this also means that we of course also need to see on the level of private investments and what does that actually mean. And I think that there had been put some legislation forward in the past where we are now also for the insurance industry basically talking about the implementation and how to deal with implementation, how to do this also in a way that it is working on the ground. Meaning, from my perspective, that we put a lot of efforts in the parliament and also in the other institutions in addressing disclosure, which I think is key, and I support also what had been voted there in the past 5 years. But it's not about disclosure, but it's also about the quality, for example, of investments and in which areas the investment goes to. And I think that maybe we could have done a bit less of reporting obligations and a bit more on the quality side, meaning, for example, addressing the green transition a bit more than what we actually achieved. Also, when it comes to some of the legislation we all know very well and don't want to go into detail. So I think I will stay with this for the moment, and then I'm looking forward to the debate today. But also feel free to reach out to us afterwards so that we can continue the conversation.
Or you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, if I could just comment something. I fully agree that we also, of course, need some public money. However, how I would do it is that maybe some of you remember Juncker plan. We had an EFSI in the European Investment Bank. And the whole idea of EFSI is that you will put a seed money from the EU budget. Let's say you put €1 from the EU budget, and then you leverage risk financing from the private sector 17, 18 times. That gives like an EU stamp to certain projects that are more risky. That, okay, this is a good project, please invest here. We put this €1, so if the project will not fly, the EU money will take the first hit. And this is a smart way of using public money, I think. But giving direct subsidies to projects, that's not. We see this with cohesion fund, we see this with COVID funds, that we invest to a road, but we don't have industry or a company at the end of the road. And that's a wrong way of doing that. If you have a company, I'm sure that public sector will actually build that road there. So that would be the mindset I would have here when we are reviewing our MFF and our next EU budget, that we would use EU money more as a lending capacity rather than subsidies. And I would increase the lending capacity of the EIB and EIF, because those are success stories there.
Georg, let me bring you into this discussion and staying with this question of competitiveness. And I'd like to ask you about where you see Europe in the global context. You know, Rasmus mentioned there about the stimulus packages in the US. China's also announced a big stimulus package. What does that mean for Europe, and are we on the right track in terms of managing our position globally?
I think it's not by chance that the issues of competitiveness and growth have re-entered the center of the debate and the new mandate of the Parliament and the Commission. I think we have lost competitiveness on the global scale as EU in general. If you then look a bit deeper in the 27 countries, there are significant differences. I mean, Aura alluded to the crisis 15 years ago, where we had difficulties in the periphery. Yeah, Greece, Portugal, Ireland, to name the most obvious examples. This time it's the opposite. Yeah, the three laggards in terms of growth and competitiveness are at the core. It's Germany, France, and Italy, while you have some thriving economies in the north, or especially which is often overseen in the east of the EU. So, but overall, if you take the EU, we are losing competitiveness for a number of reasons. Yeah, it goes from that we are rapidly aging. we often lack this, that we manage to scale up innovation. Yeah, we have good ideas, but then the markets and the products are developed somewhere else. It goes hand in hand with limited venture capital funding that we have in Europe compared to other parts of the world. But it also goes hand in hand with that we have too much red tape. I mean, one can very lively dispute Mario Draghi's report, always focusing on is there joint debt issuance or no. This is a small part of the report. If you look at many other things, when he talks about our competition policy in Europe, when he talks how our data protection rules are hindering the development of a data-based economy, I think this is where one can focus. So I think it's obvious currently Europe is as a whole a bit falling behind. Our potential growth now is 1%. So that's the rate of growth we can achieve without accelerating inflation. If you go back 30 years, it was above 3%. In the US, it's still above 2%. So I think there is something we need to do here. So the focus on competitiveness and growth is correct, but this is, to be very clear, not mutually exclusive with reaching a sustainable economy. So sustainability has to be at the focus. I mean, climate change is probably the most challenging development of our time. So it's not to say, oh no, forget all this green stuff, now we want to grow. That will not work.
Well, that actually, Rasmus, I was going to put that to you, that very question, that it's not just competitiveness as the only metric we need to concern ourselves with, it's sustainability as well. And that can be sustainability in terms of green growth, but it can also be sustainability in terms of where we want to be as a continent. I mean, we have certain standards that we have to adhere to that maybe are at odds with just accelerated growth. Where do you think we should push the needle, and how do we think about the current policy path towards sustainability?
Well, like focusing on, I mean, there are a lot of topics, and I think one of the really important also statements coming from the president of the commission before she got the votes in the parliament some months back was that she still committed to the Green Deal and to continue going this way, because like as we all remember during the campaign, not from her side but maybe from her political family, not all of them but some of them, for me it was not really clear where we will land on this. And one of the main goals also for the Greens in the European Parliament was to get a clear commitment on that we are continuing this, that we need to have a look on how to implement and so on and do things better. Nobody can be against it, but like really to have this commitment and that competitiveness, and for example dealing with the industry transition, for example, doesn't mean that we are going back, but we are taking the next steps. And that's what she committed to. And that, I think, is a very crucial point also for the debate. And this, I think, now needs to be addressed in the different legislation we will have a look on. And as I said before, I don't think we need a lot of new legislation. There had been a lot of legislation in the past. And in a lot of the legislation, there are, as I guess many of you are aware of, review clauses for the next years already like in the legislation. So there will be a review, meaning we can have a look on this like when the review is coming. And there I think, for example, addressing the financial industry, we need also to have a look on if, like for example, also the financial risks because of climate change and the climate crisis and global warming really is also addressed in the regulation of the financial markets, for example. I don't think it is, but maybe I'm wrong. But this is like something I think where we need to go a bit farther away from what I said before, reporting requirements. From my perspective, we don't need all this reporting. I mean, like if it's up to me, we don't need it. We could kill a lot of it, but we need really to have some strong instruments. And I don't know if people are happy. Like at the same time as I'm mentioning, I don't want to have this all this reporting requirements on how to address also behavioral questions when it comes to climate change and climate risks, for example. So for me, I would love to see like a transition going away from reporting, monitoring, and so on, to having some strong, maybe not a lot of instruments, but some strong instruments leading or guiding the way when it comes to also addressing climate risk, also in the financial world. And I don't think we are really good in, we are not really good in addressing this in the legislation in the past years.
I mean, I suppose it's not reporting for reporting's sake, but if everyone was a good actor, we wouldn't need all the reporting. It's really there to keep the bad actors in check, I suppose, like most laws. Or the same question to you in terms of sustainability and competitiveness. And it's often sort of juxtaposed as an either or. An event I moderated last night, someone asked the Commission official, will you consider dropping some of your green goals in order to ensure competitiveness? I mean, that's a really stark way of putting it, but how do you see the balance?
Yeah, come on. Hey, sustainability and growth goes hand in hand. There are opportunities. I only see opportunities, and also I'm always speaking about climate crisis. If we don't solve this, we don't have to talk about insolvency 2 or banking regulation. I'm sorry, we don't have anything to talk about. So that's the number one thing we have. Second thing is that we have a war in Europe. So these two things are something that we need to focus on. I would like to say something about the growth factors. Regulation, skills, and risk capital. Those are the three things I would focus on right now. I worked for an American company 3 years for Mark Zuckerberg. And it was a very difficult scene in many ways in the EU to try to explain to Americans why are we over-regulating our own market and our own companies. You heard these big speeches from the European Commission saying, we are going to catch the big tech. You're going to catch the big tech in their maybe third important market, when they have a home market where they can grow to be as big as possible, right? So the incentive for European companies should be that please grow here in your home market. Become those digital champions or whatever champions, but do that in your home market where you don't need to, when you have a company, you don't need to have 27 different regulations, right? And it was really difficult to always explain that, we are aiming to have these big digital champions, but then when you become big, like Zalando or Booking.com, then you go to the Commission DMA unit and explain yourself and we will split you. What? So this kind of like mindset that become big, but not too big, it's not something that will help our growth. And then about risk capital. We have been focusing on startups and scale-ups for a long time. And don't get me wrong, those are the companies that we should be focusing on. But then when you are talking about real scale-ups and exits plus 30 million euros, then it gets more difficult because we don't actually have like European-wide funds, risk funds, that would have like 10 to 15 years to take a risk. And that's something that we are lacking in the EU. And that's why I would rather increase the lending capacity of the EIF or EIB than focusing on subsidies that cannot help in this scene. And then skills. As you said, we are getting older and we need to be attentive place to come and work. And also, only 4% of Europeans are working in another country than where we are from. 4%. And we are talking about free movement of labor and so on and so forth. But good luck if, for example, now when I'm coming to back to Brussels and I bought a house here and I try to put my apartment in Helsinki as a guarantee. It doesn't work because we don't have a real estate market, right? So you need to have 12.5% of tax in cash. You need to have 10% of the price of the house as in cash and plus the notary, which is something that. so just giving you the idea what it is to move to another country in the EU to work, right? So there are things that we should be focusing on what comes to regulation, of course, and harmonization. That's something that where I would focus much more than thinking about reporting in insolvency 2. I think, like, just giving you the idea here.
To all those people who laughed at the mention of a notary, that's very much tell me you live in Belgium without telling me you live in Belgium. But all right, I'm going to come back to you because you mentioned I can hear your frustration with some of the ways it works, and this is to our two lawmakers, because both Enrico Letta and Mario Draghi mentioned in their reports that there is a need for better lawmaking. What do we need to change? I mean, here in Brussels or in the capitals?
I give you one concrete thing. We should not have 27 commissioners. I'm sorry, this is not something that you want to hear coming from a small member state, because I don't want to hear, because Germany will definitely have a commissioner, Finland maybe not. But the thing is that when you become a commissioner, when you become a politician, you want to leave your stamp to the history, right? And it's not going to be anti-lexing. It will be something that you will have a new regulation, because then you can call it the Barnier's regulation or Jyrki Katainen regulation or Juncker plan, right? So I'm super worried that all these commissioners, when they go to their DGs, they will start getting excellent ideas from the civil servants who have been cooking their ideas of the new regulation for 10 years, and now they will have another momentum, or last 5 years. So we will see ever more regulation, right? We will see more instruments, because EU has this tendency of having more agencies, more instruments, and more regulation. And that worries me. We should streamline. When I started working in the Commission, and as you know, commissioners should be working for their portfolios and not for their member states. But somehow when you go to these special CEF meetings, you end up seeing that, okay, this paper corner you have Berlin, here you have Paris, here you have Helsinki. So they are getting notes from their capitals, right? And see what Barnier was doing, no, not Barnier, our Breton from France was doing the last term, defending French industry, right? So this should not be the case. If we are talking about the European, where Europe benefits, or how we actually do this for the EU. So this is something I would change. And this is a challenge for the new Commission, and I will bring this up in the hearings. Dombrovskis particularly, that we need to really streamline and not have something additional again.
Rasmus, same question to you. What do we need to streamline? And because I think Aura's right. I mean, nobody wants to be in the cabinet and try and tell their new commissioner, "Oh, we don't want you to make laws. We want this to be the implementation or the enforcement commission." But that's a hard sell.
I mean, I think there is a general problem, and there I think I tend to agree that like the legacy of a parliament, a member of a parliament or a commissioner is basically which legislation did you put forward. And like my feeling is, after we dealt with a lot of legislation in the past mandate for new commissioners, this is like a bit of the benchmark. And but what I think is that we need to like have a shift in also like defining what the legacy actually means. And I think for me the legacy in this term is on how strong will you be in implementing what we actually want, and what kind of goals we had set, and what are the next steps, and will you be closer to that at the end of the term than at the beginning of the term. I think it's a bit also of a redefinition of how to do policy. I mean, I was a member of a regional parliament before I got elected to the European Parliament for the first time back in 2019, where I a lot of times had the feeling that like we are strong on defining strong goals for important topics, but we are not really strong in having the implementation or the enforcement perspective in the lawmaking. And that's a challenge I think we are dealing with in all institutions. This is true for the Commission, where I think there is also lack of transparency on the process of putting legislation forward. But this is also true for the Parliament, where like also the way in how we are building compromises with a lot of different colleagues, with a lot of different political groups who needs to agree on something at the end of the negotiations. Things are getting more and more complicated, and I don't have a clear answer on how to solve all of what I mentioned now. But I think this is something where I really think we need to work on, and we need to have a bit more in mind than like what we did in the past mandate.
I have two concrete things. we need from you guys a concrete examples of challenges that you are facing every day. That is on the way of the growth. And I have my team member here who loves to collect all that, because when I'm going to the next event, I want to use good case examples from a real life, not from this ivory tower of the Brussels bubble, because you need to deal with all this regulation, right? So this is something that I will try to bring forward with my voice that I finally have now in Brussels also as a politician, that what are the companies actually facing when we do this and that. I don't think that is a concrete thing. And then second thing is, we need to stop giving these political speeches and touch these, like, let's say, capital markets union. Everyone wants to have a capital markets union. But then when you ask from the Prime Minister of Finland, which I did many times, are you ready to harmonize insolvency law in the EU? Are you really ready to give up what we have in Finland here and here? No, too much. Are you ready to open your pension funds? Pension financing, supranational right. Are you ready to open that? Not that one, not that one. How about taxation? Should we harmonize taxation? Oh, no, we shouldn't touch that. 3 things that would actually put capital markets union forward, right? Not in the competence of the EU right now. If we want to have it in the competence of the EU, we need a political will. But if we don't want to touch on these 3 really fundamental things, let's stop talking about the capital markets union, because now we are doing nitty-gritty stuff that doesn't actually create us a capital markets union. And that's fine if we don't want that, if we don't have the will of people and politicians. But let's not give these speeches if we are not ready to then actually enforce.
I have several questions here prepared on capital markets unions.
So I just told everything.
Rasmus, you wanted to add
No,
something?
I mean, in general, I agree, but I think, like, when it comes to the capital markets union, for example, that sounds great on a panel, and I'm not saying this because you said it, but just because this is my perspective. But on the other side, of course, we also needs to look on that, like, the financial sector also is working a bit different in different member states, and I would like to like come with an example from the banking world, where, like, from a German perspective, we have a big issue on that. Our banking sector is much different than like in a lot of other countries. Like, for example, with like our Sparkassen system and Genossenschaftsbanken, where every German can agree on that we want to save this, but this is contradictory to some of what you said, for example, right? This is another example, maybe a more German example on this and on what we are facing there. And for me, I mean, it sounds easy to say that we need to work on this and we need to be ready also to kill some of what we maybe like at the national level, but like for me, it's a bit more complicated in dealing with that in legislation, to be very honest, because I'm not ready to kill the German Sparkassen and Genossenschaftsbanken and to get in Germany the same banking system as in France or in Spain. I don't think this is a good idea, also because our economic model in Germany is different, and I think it's good that it is different. For example, with much more smaller companies we want to protect, and this is what I think also needs to be. There needs to be a bit of diversity still left, also knowing the Nordic countries very well, others better than Finland, but also there you have examples on that this is maybe a bit more complicated to address. But what I wanted to add actually was something different, and this is on that I think we are also having big problems on that, like the legislation we are doing here, when this is going into national legislation, that we have like a kind of gold plating and different implementation in different member states. And especially from a German context, this is really a problem, because Germany, no matter who's in the government in Berlin, so it's not about party politics, I would be clear, my party's in the government in Berlin, so it's also something I need to address to them, right? They are always like finding a way on how to do things even more better than what they did in Brussels and so on. And this makes, of course, things more complicated. And for not coming coming with an example on the financial industry, but I had a meeting with the German social organizations and trade unions in the morning, where like the meeting was about the new budget and like instruments, social programs, and so on in the new budget. And they told me that like because also of German bureaucracy, 52% of the money they are getting out of the ESF is going to administration of the programs. I mean, this is really crazy. The majority of the money German social organizations are getting from the EU is going to deal with bureaucracy. And they said it's not because of what you are doing in Brussels, it's because of the Bundesländer in Germany who have a lot of ideas on how to deal with it. And I think there are a lot of other examples and a lot of other topics as well, but just to mention like a completely different sector. And this is also really something I think we need to address also, for example, in all of the legislation, basically, we are dealing with this term.
Well, let me ask one final question on CMU before we move on to questions of risk and resilience. I mean, one of the initial drivers more than 10 years ago was to keep the UK on board. We're now in a post-Brexit reality, so that's one thing we can take off the table. And we also look across the Atlantic to the US, and it's often held up as this gold standard of what a capital market could look like. What do we need concretely here in Europe to assuage the fears of Mario Draghi, to help him sleep easy at night? Jörg, I'll ask you, what do you think needs to come either from a political momentum perspective or a concrete driver?
I mean, I can assure you Mario mostly sleeps well at night. I mean, it's true, the Capital Markets Union idea is more than 10 years old. It was the incoming Juncker Commission. Progress was relatively limited. And if we want to play on the global scale, meaning having strategic autonomy as Europeans, we have to overcome these national egoisms. If we don't want to do this, talk is cheap. Yeah. This is where we stand currently. So Capital Markets Union, it's a perfect think tank topic, but what has this to do with real politics and real life? And I'm old, I've been around the whole time. Progress is really limited for the reasons you just alluded to. I mean, if you speak in the number of capitals, including Berlin, you got the impression we have 27 times the first best insolvency law on the globe. So there is no reason to abolish it. But maybe if we want to be less fragmented, it's better to have the second best one in all 27 countries and one that works. But it's extremely difficult to make this point. Yeah, so insolvency law is really, really tough because it's also not with the treasury people. You have to move maybe mostly to the Ministry of Justice. So I would suggest really on insolvency law to start with a limited aspect. Otherwise, we will fail again. So how do you protect, let's say, investors' rights in the common market cross-border? Yeah, and maybe it's easier to start with wholesale markets. It's less ambitious because the retail investor is not part of that. But generally, wholesale markets are cross-border. You have professionals who deal this, that's their job. So maybe start have minimum harmonization for investor rights, wholesale, cross-border. That's not a big idea, but still it will be tough work. So I would start with things like that. But there is a risk, again, that we have the same debate when the next parliament and the next commission comes in. So I'm a bit, let's say, I'm still hopeful. I think a capital markets union is needed. I mean, European capital markets are as fragmented today as they were in 2008-09. Leave aside the issue of cross-border takeovers. That's also sensitive. But either we do real stuff here or we'll continue to fall behind. And I think it's not a business model that, let's say, where in North America they produce the software, in Asia they do the hardware, and we do data protection laws in Europe. That's not a business model the way forward. And the question is, how can we overcome this situation?
Well, let's park CMU for the moment and talk about things that are perhaps more, in some ways, more tangible. sort of natural catastrophes, the aging population of Europe, and cyber risks. So the big trio, if you like, where we see risks. And I want to look a little bit at so-called protection gaps. And Rasmus, if you were to rate them, which of these, if you like, big, crises areas do you think poses the biggest risks for, or the biggest challenge rather, challenge headaches for insurers? And how do you propose that either you as the Parliament or the EU infrastructure as a whole can help deal with that?
What do you think I will reply?
I think you're going to say climate risks.
Yeah, as a green, it's maybe maybe right. I will do this. No, I mean you said it, and there I also fully agree. I mean, of course, the climate risks, climate crisis we are facing is the most fundamental risk. Let's put it like this. But what I think is what we really need to take much more into account is to address risk in general, risk which have an impact on also financial stability, for example, and to understand that both cybersecurity, I worked a lot on cybersecurity in the ITRE committee in the past mandate. I'm not doing this any longer, but working on the NIS directive, for example, on the cybersecurity competence center and so on, is not really part of the conversation when we are talking about this, like in the Econ committee, and that's what I think is the main problem. And then I don't want to like rank them, but of course I think there are some which are more existential than others. But I also think that like not addressing cybersecurity, for example, in legislation like this, or the dimension of this is a problem, and this is why I think we need a different way of thinking about legislation like this.
Well, it is quite an artificial panel moderator question to ask you to rank things like that. But Aura, I mean, you've got a background with cyber and digital. Would you say that focus needs to be there? Is the right amount of focus on it at the moment?
Yeah, actually, you might have heard that we are facing really difficult cybersecurity challenges in Finland or in Nordic states at the moment with Nordea. And as a customer, that is super worrying. In Finland, we have this idea of overall security. And as you may know, our former president, Sauli Niinistö, is writing for von der Leyen this paper on overall security right now. And the whole idea is that security is not only, it's not only our police forces or our defense, it's about everything, right? And you are representing such a crucial sector where cyber resilience and cyber security is key factors. And it needs to go through every sector in the European Union. And I think that von der Leyen here has the right approach. I have a background in military. I served in the Air Force for 1 year and in Navy, and I dealt with these issues already back then. And one thing that I learned, and during my time also at Meta, is that we need close cooperation between private sector and public sector, because private sector actually has the best knowledge here, right? Let's be honest here. A second thing, EU and NATO needs to do do this hand in hand, because military. NATO is the military force in Europe, for sure. But what EU can offer is strengthening our capabilities, strengthening our cross-border, exchanging best practices, and also strengthening our defense capacity, our security capacity, helping our industry, and so on. But it is still very national. When I was in the Commission also, I realized that member states, yes, they are talking about sharing best practices, but they're not really sharing like a real stuff, right? So this is something that we need to think that should we do that at the NATO level or EU level? Is it more secured at the NATO level? But I would say that we need all these levels: NATO, EU, private sector, together with national authorities.
Well, Jörg, I mean, the insurance industry, it's the risk manager of society. So, I mean, I'd like from your perspective to reflect on, these, as I said, I call them the big three crises. But, is the Commission on the right track? Well, we don't know what the next Commission is going to exactly do, but, using your crystal ball, give us some thoughts.
I mean, I will avoid to rank them. They have all their own roots and different ways to deal with. I mean, if you start with old age pensions, yes, this is mainly national because it's very much linked to the domestic social security and tax system. I don't see this changing in the next 5 years to come. But when we talk about savings and investment union and a labeled savings products, I would not forget the question of old age. So currently the perspective we mostly hear is to finance European needs, goes from green transition, digital transition, defense, security, but old age is a bit missing, and saving as a kind of prevention for old age should be reflected there. Second, on natural disaster, I think it's undisputed one of the biggest challenges that we face. We have seen this, that the frequency and the intensity of natural disasters increases in Europe as well. Yeah, you can see this over this year, partly in Germany, quite heavy in Central and Eastern Europe over the summer. It is often cross-border, so there might be room, especially on the prevention side, for value-adding European initiatives. Yeah, there's a relatively old directive from 2007 dealing with floods. That could be an idea to revamp this, because prevention is always pretty boring. There's no glory in prevention, but this is the key, what we need to do. Yeah, we need to slow down climate change, and second, we need to adapt to it. Yeah, our rivers, our cities, our towns, our buildings. We still build houses as if climate change does not exist. Yeah, so this is a second point. Third point, cyber is probably the most difficult one, because with the other tools we are intellectually, in my view, more advanced. Yeah, I mean, forecasting demographic developments is relatively simple. Compared to cyber, this is new. We have a war in Europe. There are cyber attacks around. There are often state actors close to states. It's a difficult field. It's something where you need the private sector, but for sure here the private sector cannot solve it alone. Yeah, there's again a big task on prevention. But the question is, if damage is there, how you limit it, how do you repair the systems? You can insure against cyber attacks, yes. Is it an issue where the private sector can work alone and insure this? I would say no. The question is, how do you develop a system where you first have private sector solutions, and then you have to carefully to define where does the state come in, where does private sector involvement end. So this is a typical field for PPPs, I would say.
It is very interlinked. I mean, of the things you mentioned, I mean, immediately it comes to mind that, you know, for example, even farming subsidies might come with a tag that you must do land and floodplain management. You get into things with the, you know, saving for old age. That comes into healthcare, which is again a national competency. So we do have a lot of layers to work through. And I think when you're talking cyber attacks, you're alluding to malicious actors, but then there's also things like power outages and so forth that could have catastrophic effects as well. We have only a few minutes left before our MEPs have to run off to their further engagements to solve all these problems for us. But would anyone have any questions to our panel? I see one here. I have a microphone here, if we can.
Hello, my name is Wolfgang. I'm with German Public Insurers, and thanks first of all for this very comprehensive tutors on all the topics that are at the heart of the insurance industry. I'd like to come back to the climate policy, and I'm a big fan on having a look back on where we're coming from and seeing what we have achieved already. And actually there's quite something we have achieved, like the emission trading scheme that has proven to be very effective. So my question would be, do you see any political momentum to develop that instrument further? This also against the backdrop that, I mean, a stronger emission trading system might be able to then give some leeway to eliminate some regulation reporting that might be more burdensome and less efficient than the emission trading scheme. Thanks.
Who would like to take that? Rasmus? A bit more in your wheelhouse, I think.
No, I mean, first of all, I agree. I think the emission trading system is the most efficient climate policy instrument we voted on in the past mandate, and because of this, the EU is getting much closer also to achieve at least some of the goals we have set. Not all of them, but some of them. And during the campaign before the elections, I think it was Fridays for Future putting a study forward, also mentioning that this really had an impact also on the question of the climate goals, and much more than each national like instrument, no matter if it's like in Germany or in Denmark or Finland, or I don't know. So this is really important. I don't really see a good momentum, to be honest, because the debate on climate shifted a lot, and especially on social elements, economic elements, but I still think it will be developed also because of what I mentioned before. Also, when you're looking on the emission trading system, we agreed on an assessment or evaluation, I think it's in 2026, where like we'll also have a look on loopholes and like broadening the instrument and on the effects this had until then. So I think this will be part of it, and it's of course also much easier for the Commission to work with the instruments the Parliament already voted on than putting other instruments forward where they're maybe not having majorities any longer, because we all know that like also the political dynamics inside of the Parliament had shifted, and with like some parties even not thinking that climate change is something which has happened, got strengthened by the election. I think it will be a lot about using the instruments we are having, and it's agreed to have a review like in 26, and I think they are preparing. And I also think that the commissioners who will be responsible if they pass the hearings, but I think the ones dealing with the green transition have good chances. They are also committed to this, and this gives me a little bit of hope. Yeah.
And one thing I would add, I would give up the free giveaways rather sooner than later. That's something that I would like to see in a review.
I agree.
Yes, I've one down here. Anyone else hands up for a question? Okay, so our last question here.
Yeah. Hello, and thank you for that very interesting panel. A lot of things I would agree on, but let me come back to the simplification question of legislation. Now, I've been working with the EU institutions for a number of years, and what I've seen is very often, once you're in the Parliament, in the Council, or in trilogues, you have one solution to an issue or one requirement. Not everybody agrees to that. Then there comes an alternative. Not everybody agrees to the alternative. Then the solution is we do the two. So actually, in the end, instead of one, we have two. It's worse than the initial proposal. As I said, it happens everywhere. Is there any solution to actually to simplification instead of having it inbuilt in the process, making it worse?
Well, two things. Have been participating in trilogues for many times from the Commission side also, is that when you have a good argument from NGOs or from industry that you can actually defend your position on the corridors with that. Not only like I think like that or my party group thinks like that, but the whole insurance sector thinks like that. Much easier, right? That's why I'm asking that, what we need is that it's like pack up our ideas here with data, with concrete examples, because then it's much easier. And the second thing is that worried me during the von der Leyen first commission. Commission gave really vague proposals, and it left room for Parliament and Council to actually come in and add and add and add. And then we had these Christmas trees. So what I want to also highlight during the hearings is that the Commission needs to give better proposals that are more ready-made. It might sound not that democratic in that sense. However, I think it's more reasonable. But that also means that the Commission needs to have better impact assessment to backing these proposals. And that worried me also last time. We need better impact assessment, much ready proposals, and then good data and examples from you guys to back us up in trilogues.
I agree on the impact assessment. to be very honest, I'm a bit afraid of that it even could get worse or not better because of how von der Leyen put the proposal forward on the different portfolios, because my feeling is that a lot of commissioners have responsibilities across to other portfolios, meaning also now in some of the meetings I at least had with some of the nominees, it was not so easy because then sometimes they said, yeah, but that's not my responsibility on, for example, addressing housing related to the financial markets. That's something I'm, for example, quite interested in. And then like one of the commissioners being responsible for this said, yeah, but I'm not the housing commissioner. But the housing commissioner, of course, has not the DG like in his portfolio who's dealing with the financial markets and so on. So there will be a lot of coordination issues, which makes it even more complicated because von der Leyen is structuring the Commission in a completely different way, which at the end also could mean there will be power centralized with her, like at the with the presidency, with and her team, and maybe that's good at the end, because then she has the possibility to coordinate it differently than like if you have, I don't know, Franz Timmermans doing what Franz Timmermans want, Margrethe Vestager what Margrethe Vestager wants, and they are not talking to each other, right? So maybe it's a better way than like what we had before. I don't know, but I'm afraid of that this is not working on the ground, because at the end, like also the new colleagues in the commission, the new commissioners, they will also have, as we also said before, they will also be interested in having a strong portfolio and a strong legacy at the end of the term. So for me, it's really not clear where we will end on this in the way like von der Leyen is preparing her team, her college right now. But let's see. I agree on the topic that this needs to be addressed, and we need to have some clarity there. But for me, it's not really clear as it stands now. Yeah.
Okay, to wrap up, we're all going out to place bets this afternoon. So I want you to tell me from the European Parliament, out of the 27 or the 26 proposed commissioners, how many are going to get rejected?
Start with the EPP.
2, 3?
To be honest, a couple of weeks back I said 2, but now I don't know anymore. This might be the first time in history that we don't actually kill anyone. So I would say actually 0.
Okay, Rasmus?
That was why I said ask the EPP before, because my feeling is that the big political groups are committing to each other not to kill their nominees. And that's also why I think maybe we will have, I think it could be interesting for the Hungarian. So I'm saying 1 just because I don't want to say the same as you did. But my feeling is also that the willingness of the bigger political families in the House and the diversity is quite high. And if you start killing, I don't know, Mr. Fito, then maybe others will be killed as well. And I think neither the socialists, liberals, or the EPP are interested in it. But I mean, I'm from the Greens. For me, it's easier to say because we don't really have some nominees coming from our political family. So.
But let's see how they answer our questions.
Yeah, no, I mean.
Jörg, final word from you. Anyone you want to kill, figuratively speaking?
I mean, in my job, you take what you get as
power.
commissioner, yeah. So that's very different. No.
Okay,
Just
well,
looking at that.
thank you all three of you very, very much indeed. Please, a round of applause for our speakers.
Thank you.